My name is Elena Shi. I am professor in American Studies and Ethnic Studies and Associate Director of Academics here at the Simmons Center. I also have the great honor of being the Director of Grad Studies for our Masters in Public Humanities program, which this speaker series is oriented around. We have two speakers today. I'm just introducing one of them. It is my delight to introduce Professor Marisa Katz. That's right? Or am I doing both? Oops.
Oh. I can take Jean.
Maybe I messed it up. So sorry. To introduce Professor Marisa Katz. Formally to the Simmons Center, Professor Katz joins as the professor of the Introduction to Public Humanities course that so many of our graduate students are taking right now. Marisa is also a lecturer at RISD of Computation, Technology, and in the Cultural Department. Marisa is a journalist and editor of Syrian descent who has contributed to numerous publications, including the New York Times, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, Vogue, NPR, Marketplace, Time, and the New York Review of Books. She writes broadly and brilliantly. We just met this summer, but anytime I throw an idea off the top of my head, she immediately says, "Oh, I wrote an article about this," and she'll send it over, and then I share it with the chef. So that. So I wish I could be taking her course. She's been awarded major grants for her editorial work from the Keith Haring Foundation, the Trust for Mutual Understanding, and the Andy Warhol Foundation. In 2018, Marisa served as one of the first Kickstarter fellows, and later that year she founded the Craig Newmark Philanthropies, a program through the Iveen Center for the Future of Journalism. Marisa Katz was also the founding editor of Creative Time Reports, whose key goal was to publish artists' unflinching perspectives on the most challenging issues of our time. Under her tenure, the website co-published Creative Time Reports with The Guardian, Foreign Policy, The New Yorker, Slate, Salon, The Intercept, and many more. Please welcome me in welcoming Marisa Katz. Who will now introduce our distinguished guest and visitor today, Jean Cooney.
Thank you. Jean.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
So I think actually what I'll do is obviously I'll say the requisite sort of where you were educated, but then I think we should dive right into how we got to know each other, which will then tell the story of Jean and her work. Jean got a degree from Boston University in International Relations and then a master's degree in Arts Administration from NYU. We met shortly thereafter, right? At Creative Time. We started in the same year, so I was at the tail end, more or less, tail end of 2011, and she came on early 2012, and we worked on two different projects while we were there, so we spearheaded two different divisions of the organization, but both of us had the same mandate, which was to ensure artists were given every opportunity to speak to the issues of our times. For me, as Elena had mentioned, it took the form of journalism, so I was dispatching artists to create works for newspapers. For Jean, it meant, and I'm not kidding, it was about producing some of the most iconic artworks of the 21st century, and this includes Kara Walker's A Subtlety, Pedro Reyes's Democracy, Phil Collins' Bring Down the Walls, Suzanne Lacey's Between the Door and the Street. And she didn't stop working on groundbreaking projects when she moved on to Times Square Arts in 2019. So I love and continue to love all of the projects she does. And I have covered more of your projects for radio stations than maybe like a bulk of a lot of my other art projects I've covered. And we're going to get to those today and what the significance is of making artwork in Times Square. But one of the things that strikes me about her curated projects is the combination of spectacle and timeliness and depth. And like I think the time that she presented the world's largest animatronic Hotdog, along with a summit that was called To Be Frank, that featured talks like street vending and the American dream and food futures and empowered eating. So I'm gonna hand the mic off to Jean, and she's gonna talk about some of these really career-defining works, but also public art-defining works that she's produced over the past decade and a half. And then afterwards, I'll ask her a few questions, and then hopefully we can open up this wonderful dynamic group of people who are joining us today.
Nice.
Jean,
Thank you for that introduction.
former cubicle mate. We were just side by side. Yes.
Yeah. It is so nice to be your friend and colleague and in this room with you together with all of you all here today. So thanks for having me. And yeah, you mentioned some of the projects that I got to work on at Creative Time. I started there as a project manager, fresh out of grad school, like an adult baby grad student. Like I was already in my early 30s, but like fresh out of grad school, I landed this incredible job at Creative Time, and then I stayed there for 7 years. And when I left, I was the deputy director, but really staying on the production side of things and the programming side of things. And that experience really, I mean, it was life-changing, and it just educated me on the expansiveness of what art can be, what public art can be specifically, the form it can take, the places you're able to find it, and just this incredible synergy between artists and their big ideas and space. And we worked, like Marisa had mentioned, on projects that involve sugar and pigeons and, you know, haunted houses and solar-powered ice cream trucks, as well as dance and gatherings and dialogue-based work. So really, it was truly an education both in life and professionally. We can talk about this project, but I'm sure you're all familiar with it. Kara Walker's A Subtlety from 2014, cited in the former Domino Sugar Factory. And so the projects we got to work on range from pieces that became iconic and historic, and were also massive and monumental in scale, also to more, I would say, socially engaged and relationship-based and community-engaged pieces that didn't necessarily have this kind of object to embody all that the work entailed. And I'm just going to play these two videos because this project that also I feel like represents the other end of that spectrum you also mentioned was with the artist Phil Collins, and it occupied it spanned my entire tenure at Creative Time, all 7 years. I was like handed the Phil Collins files when I got there, and it was the last project I was able to work on when I left in 2018, but basically it involved visiting minimum but mostly maximum security prisons all throughout New York State, specifically Sing Sing, working with currently incarcerated individuals as well as formerly incarcerated individuals about their experiences, but then also bringing their voices and lived experiences together with abolitionists, experts, and academics in the field to create a school by day and nightclub by night in a firehouse located in downtown Manhattan next to a major correctional facility. So like that's a mouthful already, and so I'll just give you a little taste of what that was like, right?
Yeah.
Videos? Okay, let's see how sound works.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can do it. Whoops, sorry, I moved too fast. Nope, can't even. What do you think? Because it's do we have Wi-Fi? That's what's happening.
We do have Wi-Fi.
Okay.
There is a brown guest.
It should be here. You guys, sorry, I'm like only so
Well, I
good
think
at my own
actually-
computer. But we can keep
Why
talking.
don't we, that's a
Thank
good
you.
point because I don't know how many of you know the artist Phil Collins, not the singer, the
Not
artist.
Genesis, although that was definitely a nice in when
Yeah.
we were trying to book a meeting at a correctional facility. We visited one correctional facility, actually it was at Sing Sing, and some people in the room were there with their Genesis CDs, like in Phil Collins CDs, ready
Yeah.
to meet the real Phil Collins, but so it worked into our advantage sometimes, but
So
Phil
he's-
is UK based.
He's a British artist, right? And he's, let's see if this works now. There we go.
Sound. I think it's coming from here, but
It's not.
is that okay?
No, let's talk about it for a
Okay.
second. Yeah.
And then I can get into
Yeah.
actual projects.
Yeah, let's take like a second to talk about this. Tell us, so what was happening? You said there were two parts to this. It was during the day you were having talks, and then at night it became this club, basically, right?
Yeah, I think music is a really important part of Phil's life in general, and also he was looking at house music in the 70s and 80s, specifically in Chicago and New York, but he's also from Manchester, and just really wanted to touch on that legacy of house music and the spaces that hosted nightclubs around the house music scene that were really spaces of liberation for actually a cross-section of groups that were marginalized, but you know, it was a safe space to have your body feel free, and he was really, you know, taking that notion and trying to embody that spirit into this space that he was going to create, but it was a space that was specifically talking about, you know, like it said in this quick teaser, the juxtaposition of people whose bodies had been controlled, surveilled, and locked up in literal, you know, cages and cells, to trying to juxtapose that with a space where you could truly feel safe and free, even for a moment. And then by day, the conversations were guided by people who had experienced or been directly impacted by incarceration. So not just from the lens of academia or study, but real lived experience. And then each weekend that space would turn into a nightclub that were led by different collectives. So we had one night that was themed around Vogue competition, and then other nights that were, you know, different DJs and collectives that brought in their own communities, and it was a lovely experience to be there.
I have a question though about, you said you were given the Phil Collins file, you know, and I think that's really interesting because Jean is very gifted when it comes to pivoting and supporting artists' visions, even in times when the vision itself cannot be materialized in the way that maybe they had originally conceived of it, right? So, and that was like a running theme. There were so many incredible artists that would come through Creative Time, and we would work with them for years and years and years. And this project in particular, I'm wondering what, if you can share about how this was shaped by external factors, right? Like how Phil transformed an original idea into what it became.
Yeah. Well, so Creative Time was very much an artist-led organization, and you kind of need to like manually turn the gears and the muscle around what that means every time. Because as a producer, you're like, all right, great, we're going to do it. Let's make it. What is it? Tell me what you need me to do, and I'll do it. And in this case, Phil is very relationship-based and process-based. So I remember we would kind of try and put the pressure on and be like, yeah, okay, but like, what is it going to be? Like, and he was like, I don't know yet. I haven't had enough conversations. I haven't met with enough people. And so it was a lot of visits, open-ended, you know, not with a preconceived outcome, but just to speak with more and more people, and especially when you're trying to cross the lines between the walls of a correctional facility or the prison industrial complex, you know, trust doesn't come easily. So it was about meeting with one person and getting them to say, actually, you know, my friend is the librarian at this minimum security women's prison who loves the arts. You should speak with him. Spoke with him and the group of women he worked with, who then connected us to someone else upstate, who then connected us to someone else downstate. We found ourselves at Sing Sing, where they happen to have a lot of already creative programming. And so because there was a precedent for that, we found a connection that then allowed us to meet with a certain group of men who loved music and were making music. And so Phil just made music with them for 2 years. And that was also open-ended. And at one point, we shifted from, he wanted to stage a talent show within the correctional facility to really kind of frame these individuals not by the crimes they were indicted for, but by their human qualities, their interests, their passions, their skills, their expertise. And so that was a thing for a while. And then we realized we could not do that, and it was brought up a lot of questions around how does the public then experience that, and who is this project for? There are a lot of rules around what you can even do inside a correctional facility, as you can imagine, and so we stayed with the constraints we were given, which was making music, and also conversation-based. What do you want people to know about your experience? If you can't host a conversation with someone on the outside, how do you want us to shape it, and who should we be talking to, and what should we be talking about? And then we made an album, both with the men that were incarcerated and people who had, the project went on so long, people's sentences were completed, and so in the beginning of the project, some of the men were serving long-term sentences that had been released and came out and made part of this house music inspired album with us. So it shape-shifted the whole way, but I think it was necessary in a way.
Well, you have a video of what it looked like, which I think is really great because it's conceptual the way that you're talking about it now. But
yeah,
let's see if we can watch this.
I can do it.
Yeah.
We're here to talk about all the brothers and sisters that can't be here. And that's why I'm here. I'm standing on their shoulders. They held me down for a really long time, and I really appreciate it. And I want nobody to ever forget that we got brothers and sisters that ain't here with us. Yeah. Bring them down. Bring them down. Bring them down. If they ain't free, we ain't free. I ain't free, you ain't free. Bring them down. Woo! All right. Thank y'all. Thank y'all. Thank y'all so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's again, that couldn't be more different from a massive monumental sculptural work. And you can see how long it's taking me to try and impart all the aspects of it. And I'm talking about how it felt and who was there and what was discussed. But it was a really interesting project to close out my tenure with, and learned a lot from it.
So then you moved into Times Square, which is perhaps one of the most visible places on the planet.
Right.
And you're tasked with what exactly?
So Times Square Arts, I go around and act like it's an independent nonprofit. It's actually the public art department of the Times Square Alliance, which is, I know it sounds like I'm talking shop, but it's important because it's an interesting way to be able to present public art in that, and that I didn't fully understand before I got the job. But the Times Square Alliance is a business improvement district, or often you'll see a city has a downtown alliance. They're tasked with, in conjunction with the city, keeping that district safe and clean. Times Square Alliance is one of the biggest business improvement districts in New York City. It started in the 90s with that mandate, but has grown to host programming and signature events that my colleagues produce New Year's Eve, and we produce a summer-long series of performances. And Times Square Arts, started in 2010, has grown to be a more formal art program. So we try and commission 2 large-scale sculptures or installations a year. We run a program called Midnight Moment. We host our own performances and other cultural groups' performances, and we're experimenting with a public artist in residence program. And then, I tried to bring a lot of what I learned at Creative Time to Times Square. It's a really potent place, as you can imagine. I'll give you some of the quick stats, but it's busy. A lot of life happens there. It's 200,000 to 300,000 people come through the district every single day. We think of it as mostly for tourists. At least that was my preconceived idea of what Times Square was. But over 170,000 people work there, whether that's in theaters or hotels, back of house workers in restaurants, and so on. We have 5,800 residents, if you can believe it. People live in Times Square. It's not just the tourists and and the Elmos. And there are senior centers, schools, houses of worship, the whole deal. So when you think about what Times Square is, it's a really a pretty diverse and broad understanding of the public when you think about programming for the public. And it holds such a powerful space in our consciousness. I mean, it's one of the most recognized urban spaces in the world, and immediately when you say Times Square, something comes to mind, whether, for better or for worse, whether it's good or bad. But it's a very powerful place to turn over to artists. So that has been really fun. And it also symbolizes so many things. It's like capitalism, you can pick apart consumerism and American culture at large. And you can also have fun there, because it's a space that is refreshingly not too self-serious, or it's not a place to take yourself too seriously. And we have a whole range of types of works that I think reflect those things. If you look like you want to ask me a question.
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, it's interesting because for me, being a freelance journalist, it's really hard to sell stories around art these days. But whenever I say Times Square and then I add one of Jean's projects, editors perk up. And I think it's been a gift to see the seriousness that you've brought to this little patch of the city. But how do you take what is really, it's about, like we were saying earlier, it's about spectacle, it's about getting people interested. How do you happen to come across, or how often do you come across artists who can make work that tick all of those boxes?
Yeah, I don't think you have to fully check every single box every time. I think some of the exciting parts of the program are that we can shift gears within a single year. I think it is a space where you can have, I think, more weighted works and work with more traditional materials like bronze and present sculpture. You can also have fun and do inflatables and animatronic hot dogs, but I do think that whatever form it's taking, the work needs to be tapping into something that feels timely and resonant politically, socially, culturally. And there's a lot of different ways to play that, but I guess maybe it's a good time to jump to the hot dog, because I think is that okay?
Yeah, but one thing too, just to say that, to go back to Midnight Moment, just to show that, because that is, so let's talk about this project as well, because so this runs 364 days a year from 11:57 p.m. to 12 a.m. and it takes over 95 and counting screens. Yeah. This is the largest public artwork, I don't know, in the world. I mean, like, how do you even say? I mean, I would argue it is, but how do you, you've used these screens in many ways to feature not just beautiful and sort of captivating work, but also sometimes there is, you're bringing people from all over the world that are sharing personal stories through their digital images that they're projecting. Mm-hmm. So your mandate is really split in a sense. You have these in which she needs to get the people who own the billboards to agree to let her use them, which is a huge process in and of itself. Mm-hmm. And then you also have your public art projects, which require building and creating pieces, you know, that people can physically interact with. So I'm curious, does that bifurcation of your job, how do you manage that? How do you hold both? I mean, you don't have a huge office, right? It's just no. So how do you do that then?
How do we
how do you think of yourself in terms of curating? Are there ways in which you might have a midnight moment that lends itself to a public artwork, or does the public artwork lend itself to the midnight moment? Are they sometimes operating on their own kind of schedules? Yeah. How, whatnot?
Well, I think, they're on different schedules. So for our large scale works, we try and plan further out in advance, and I'm really looking for artists that are going to be talking about something that's not necessarily going to be newsworthy next week, but has probably been a pressing issue for this city or country or, beyond for a long time. Things like environment, race, representation, all the things, migration, things that are feeling pressing now, but also will probably be a worthy conversation a year from now, 18 months from now. So, and then also artists that are working in different forms that feel new for the program, but also in a way that's going to stop you in your tracks in the middle of this very chaotic space. And then for Midnight Moment, that is just, it's grown to the point where 95 screens is going to stop you in your tracks probably for at least 3 minutes. So we've got scale on our side, and then it's about artists who can, one, take advantage of that scale and that unique platform, but also be really game to take on the constraints in that the plazas, we have a lot more agency over what kind of works we present there. on the screens, as you mentioned, each one of those, this is a good example of how many different ones there are, but each one of those displays is run by a different corporation, and sometimes multiple organizations. So you've got, like, if you see the Marriott marquee screen there, that's actually one large screen on a building that's owned by Vornado, branded by the Marriott, and then run by Silvercast, which is an out-of-home advertising company. So there's like a lot of competing interests, and then you have their neighbors underneath: T-Mobile, Sephora, Swatch, Levi's, and these are all, you know, designed to. These are mega companies that are not there for the art. You know, they're there to advertise in one of the world's largest and most visible stages, and often, you know, competing with their neighbors to do that. So to get them to all say yes to the same thing is a feat, and really inspiring, actually. But then also the constraints around what kind of content can be shown on each of those screens, and that they will all agree to it is another, I think, I call it like a gauntlet of constraints, but also it's, you know, it's just an interesting exercise. And if the artist is game for that and can also present a work that doesn't need a backstory to be engaging, I think, like, the sweet spot for Midnight Moment is maybe a work that has deeper layers that we can get into, either in text, signage, and artist talk, programming, or otherwise, but face value for those 3 minutes is going to be able to feel like dazzling, engaging, and dynamic for the visitor that wasn't even intending to go there to see it in the first place, and probably will never run into that signage where we've described what the work is or who it's by. They're just going to be there, taking a big 360, you know, on a 7-block span of a 3-minute work, and it has to have to be able to take something away with them just from that alone. So
Yeah.
similar but different types of constraints, and then sometimes they'll sync up where we are able to commission an artist's work that can also present a Midnight Moment at the same time, which is a cool way to give two contexts to an artist's practice in this big space.
Yeah, so should we talk about, did you want to talk about Jen and Paul's project now?
Well, yeah, so when you're talking about checking off all the boxes, okay, cue the 65-foot long animatronic hot dog. So Jen Catrone and Paul Outlaw are artists that I just felt like they were perfect for Times Square. They're like fun, campy, love to poke fun at America in general and American culture, and they also kind of love Times Square in a way. Like they have they match Times Square energy, and kind of exceed it in certain ways. And so we went through some proposals. They proposed the world's largest hot dog sculpture that also raised every day at noon at basically almost full mast, and sent confetti out the end of it. So there's daily confetti blasts, which obviously, you know, makes a pretty big statement, talk about stopping people in their tracks. But the beauty of it was that they were using this spectacle, this over-the-top spectacle to, yes, get people to pause, but also then we hosted so many things. All of these programs that are picking apart and critiquing American culture, patriotism, the masculinity of patriotism in American culture, consumption, excess, capitalism, the whole thing, and also tell different stories that weirdly can fall under the guise of a hot dog. So we did interviews with Times Square street vendors who are primarily immigrants, and hot dogs actually have always been a handheld street food that came to us through immigrants. So that was an interesting story to tell that from its legacy into contemporary Times Square. We hosted a hot dog themed drag wrestling competition to kind of play with the theatrics of masculinity. We also hosted, this is inside the hot dog actually, it was a piece called The Jungle, and it exposed the emails that were exchanged between meatpacking CEOs peak COVID that kind of acknowledged their lack of care for workers who were being affected by COVID and dying higher than rates elsewhere throughout other industries, and it was turned into an operatic performance, and then the emails with certain redacted parts were posted all on the interior of the hot dog. You had to walk inside to experience it. And then we had a canine beauty pageant, the hottest dog show. We had an actual eating competition with Nathan's hot dogs, and then we ended with this summit. Sorry, this gift moved so quickly, but we hosted the summit that you mentioned, Marissa, called To Be Frank, where We had vegan feminists, pitted against competitive meat eaters. We had a high school debate team debating the merits of ketchup versus mustard as like an exercise in democracy, which we had people on the street vote on as well. We had comedians, we had people talking about food sovereignty. We talked with some street vendors as well, and the head of the Street Vendors Project and some food historians. So it's like just an amazing example of how much you can pack into one symbol and one kind of giant spectacle. So it got incredible attention, I think, on the plazas and in the press, but then it opened up, for those who wanted to linger longer, opened up the door to some deeper conversations. And so that felt like a good fit, like a piece that checked off a lot of boxes for Times Square specifically.
When you find the artist, you find the project, how do you think of the programming that goes with it? Do you ever just have something that doesn't have programming, or does it always come with talks or performances? Because I've seen over the years that since you've been there, a lot of ancillary programming that goes into it. So I'm curious, do you feel like that is very key in order for the success of the project?
Yes and no. I mean, those programs were driven by the artists. So they had more ideas than the ones I named. So it was almost about reeling them in. And they had so much energy. Also, Jen, they're an artist duo. They're also married in real life. And Jen was pregnant. And like had a child.
9 months pregnant.
9 months pregnant and had
Yeah.
a baby. Like, we took 1 week off from programming so she could have a baby. They were like still texting me the day of about the summit, and they were very involved and very energetic, and they came out and created their own sets for the dog show, and that's why we had so many programs there, because they had an abundance of ideas and energy. And then for some artists, it is just not about the program, it's about letting the work speak for itself. And that might be a good segue to Thomas J. Price. Yeah. Thomas J. Price is an artist that creates works that are about, again, identity, race, and representation, and he primarily has been working on these large-scale bronze figurative pieces, and he brought a piece to Times Square called Grounded in the Stars, and he is an artist who, he wants to let the work speak for itself, and she really did. It was actually, we presented this in the spring, and we got some nice press and attention, and people were certainly curious and stopping by the sculpture, but it was about the second weekend where Fox News picked up the piece, and on their national nightly news segment did like a 6-minute segment titled DEI Sculpture Lands in Times Square, which immediately overnight prompted hate mail, more
Scary.
Conservative,
Yeah.
our inboxes,
Yeah.
scattershot to the whole office, of course the artist himself as well, and just prompted a conservative and blatantly racist backlash to the piece that was not something the artist hadn't seen before, and he also had prepared us for a little bit, but I was actually caught off guard by it. And then what followed were emails that were slightly different in tone, which was, as a Black woman, I don't like this sculpture. Why did you make her overweight? Why did you make her angry? Why is she dressed sloppily? And then there was emails, another wave, which was, I got a message from a young woman who had started a petition to have it removed. She's from Central Illinois, and she wrote, as a young Black woman, I want you to remove this sculpture because of the racist memes and backlash it's prompted that I now bear the burden of, and currently being traumatized by. And then came a wave of people defending her and talking about why it was important to have this woman and this figure and this artwork in Times Square. And so that almost, I'm not saying it replaced the programming, but the dialogue was very real and very active, and that felt like that was important to host and not necessarily intervene in. For me as the producer, curator, and Thomas as the artist also had felt like he had put out this work and had spoken to it enough and was going to not also engage, but let the debate play itself out. And so what we did instead was have people on the ground that we trained as almost like ambassadors to the piece, or a docent, would be more a conventional term, that could have conversations in real time. And because more and more people were coming because they had heard of it, seen, the commentary online, and wanted to experience it for themselves. So that's how we tried to not create a program, but host what was naturally unfolding as the dialogue around this work. And then I have, I guess, the video that
I think I want to
gives an
watch that
overview.
video. I think in order to understand how your work has changed, though, since we've met, is we need to sort of talk about the way in which people connect through social media, or the way they will broadcast, imagery or whatnot. And I think that your job has changed. I would say, obviously in 2013, 2014, we see Instagram coming in, and we see a change in that respect. But I would say it's even more heightened and different, and images are traveling in ways that are unprecedented. And so I feel like I'm just curious, and we can watch this video because it's very good at explaining what happened, but do you get nervous or more nervous now before you put out a work? Because there can be the in-person interactions that you have, which can be very meaningful, and you can converse about disagreements, but then there's this whole world online, this conversation that happens online that often feels like it's nothing that you can even wade into. So I'm just curious, personally, professionally, how do you think about that before the unveiling of a work?
Yeah, I mean, I think about it differently since this project. We're doing a piece that's opening next week, and it'll be interesting. It's themed around immigration and identity and kind of the contradictions of the American dream, but the form it takes is not necessarily figurative, which I think actually is a big reason as to why this piece got the backlash it did, or drove people kind of crazy. But I think I am just lucky. I think it really depends right now where you are working and what organization you are in when you're taking risks. I happen to work for a place, so the Alliance is run by the president, Tom Harris, is my boss, basically, and I feel very protected, and I'm working for someone and with other colleagues who are very game to take on heated conversations. I mean, it's kind of Times Square at its best as a space that should be able to host a crossroads of perspectives and make no assumptions about people's politics. People are coming from all over the world, red states, blue states, and if you can't handle a dialogue with those conflicting viewpoints, then maybe, Times Square is not the space for you. And so when we got those messages, Tom was like, we'll call them back. And obviously the people who, there were certain messages we were not responding to, obviously, because it was just about hate, racism, and otherwise. But when there was a cohesive argument made, or, something written that someone took the time to write, he was like, we're writing everyone back and we're calling everyone back.
That's amazing.
And so I spoke with the woman who started the petition for, an hour and a half, and kept in touch with her, and we called people back, and, it was, if you're working for a space where you have the resources and support and people who are going to be behind you, as I happen to have, then let's keep going.
I will say that Ann Pasternak, who now runs the Brooklyn Museum, was our former boss, also was a big believer in the calling people, talking to them. And I think your boss Tom is right in this case. Picking up the phone is a gesture that is kind of outside the norm now, right? But it does make a big difference to hear the tone of a person's voice and to connect in that way. So I think that's amazing that you did that, because I was right there listening to what you were going through, and I'm very impressed that you did that, and I think kudos to him for having you do that as well. But I think maybe we should show, I don't know if people know, the video that you have that kind of...
Yeah, no, and I'll just say also, we were working with an artist who was also ready for it. So, it's not like we asked this artist for the very first time to, make himself vulnerable or expose his practice in this high profile space around issues he had not addressed before. I mean, he was also, this is his practice, and this is what he's deeply invested in, and he's gone all around the world, and experienced this more deeply than we have even for the one project. So that's also key. It's like, you know, you gotta be working with an artist who's ready, and Thomas certainly is. And yeah, the responses were so wide ranging and so actually inspiring. And every press release you write, you're always like, this piece will spark dialogue on the topics of X, Y, and Z, and then you're like, I hope it does, you know, like you hope, that's the intention. And it was one of the first times where you could actually track it and see it and record it and archive it, that a dialogue really was being had.
This statue is making quite the stir on the internet.
People are losing their minds.
I appreciate the statue.
I'm not liking that statue at all.
I don't understand what's the problem.
I never saw a black woman standing so tall in New York City, so I'm happy she did.
I'm here at the statue that has social media going crazy right now.
Seeing another piece for me to stop and just have a moment with was very powerful.
Being a plus-size black woman, I kind of looking at it was like, oh, I wonder what me as a small child would have thought looking at something like that.
Who is this woman? What did she do to get a statue? Nothing. This isn't a real person. It's a DEI statue.
To have a 12-foot tall bronze statue, to not see the true beauty and representation of that, I don't understand how you couldn't get that.
It's really nice to see something come across as like this everyday person that looks a little bit out of place, but I also think that's because of where we are standing. It might not look out of place if everything in our surrounding reflected everyday life more to us.
So what did you take from that? I mean, we talked about this a little bit, but what are the key lessons that you feel you'll apply, like moving forward in the work that you do? Are there any? I mean, you're always kind of in. I know you said the press release version of it. You're like, you hope this dialogue happens, but you are always aiming to create a dialogue. Every one of your pieces really does do that. And so, is there something you feel that you've from this experience that when working with artists, or that you might change, or do you feel like just keep going, this was, you know, yeah, what is the takeaway for you?
I don't know if we'll experience this exactly again. This was an intersection of so many specific things, but moving into the fall project that we're presenting, I mentioned, does have themes around immigration, which, you know, obviously is a very, very fraught issue right now, actively playing out in our cities and in New York. So I guess preparation, I mean, I'll be honest, before we presented this work, it was the artist who said, you know, we just presented a similar piece in Florence. We had some backlash. I want you as the presenting organization to feel prepared. And I was like, I so appreciate that. We feel prepared, but I'll also say, like, we've never experienced that before, and this is Times Square, so it's like kind of different. We'll probably be fine. And so that was the first time I was like that caught off guard. So I guess now I just feel more prepared. You know, that I'm not going to necessarily in this political climate, especially, be able to predict the outcome or the reception of any particular piece. I do, like I said, feel more though prepared just in terms of the colleagues that I'm going to be entering into these projects with. And yeah, I think it was an interesting also illumination of how conversations play out online and on our phones and in the media, and how different that is on the ground. If you went to visit that work, it was like easy breezy down there on the plazas. I mean, people were definitely, interest was heightened, but there were no arguments, you know, there was no fighting and no vandalism in this case. I know Thomas has experienced that in the past, but like, it was quite civilized. So remembering that is, I think, an important lesson, and just not being afraid of having that dialogue is, you know, like Tom was like, call that guy from Fox News and tell him we're doing a piece on immigration next. I mean, like, it's like we have to be having these conversations, and in some way, and I think it's okay to not, you know, but art could be a possible kind of like side door into some of these conversations that we either like stay in our bubble around or don't engage the other perspective around, and art could weirdly be a somewhat neutral space to get into it a little bit, and so I'm more game for that. than ever, and yeah.
We have such a dynamic group of people in the room. I don't
Yeah.
want to hog all your time, so I was thinking maybe we could turn it over to the group and ask you some questions.
Please.
Yes.
Is this piece still there?
No, it was up for 8 weeks, and it came down in June, and I had hopes that it might travel and pop up again. We'll see. But
Would you please also introduce yourself?
I'm Stephen Brigidi. Bristol Middle Passage is our organization. We just, in fact, launched a sculpture, outdoor sculpture piece in Bristol.
Nice.
Professor Bogues was part of that. The piece itself is an indigenous woman, an African man, and as a child that is the embodiment of both cultures. It is to acknowledge the history of slavery, relative to Bristol especially, and to honor the people who were harmed. So we're really intrigued. I think this is a magnificent piece, this female.
Are the individuals in the sculpture you're describing, are they anonymous or are they historical figures? Because I think that
Well, the artist
conversation came up
Spencer
a lot.
Evans, who's local, RISD professor, he actually had some models. A woman from the Pokanoket tribe
Yeah.
did model for him, and an African man that was, I think, a friend, colleague, and the child. You have to see this. It soars. I have it on my phone. Maybe I can transmit it somewhere. But the child is. It came from his daughter, who was born a little over a year ago. In a dream he had, that was the face. And we had a sensational ceremony around this, with the involvement of Professor Bogues, the Pokanoket tribe, some political figures also, in fact.
That's beautiful.
So outdoor sculpture is so critically important.
Yeah.
And what we hear immediately, it's about DEI. It's a fabulous sculpture of a woman who happens to be a woman of color. Why does it have to become DEI or controversial?
Yeah.
Because they're targeting that, clearly. I mean, we're under assault, especially by the propaganda of Fox News, among others. So we're doing our part. Charlie is my colleague, and he's part of our organization.
Hi, I'm Charlie Edwards.
Hi.
I'm curious to ask you why you asked Stefan the question about whether the sculpture we did, people were anonymous. Why did you ask that?
Because a couple different threads of conversations and critiques and questions came up around this piece, and one was, well, why there are so black women are so, first of all, women are underrepresented in terms of public monuments and sculpture, but especially women of color, so why did you not choose a historical figure to uplift? And that's just not what that artist does, so it wasn't, but it was a question, which I thought was interesting, and also kind of to anticipate or think about how people might respond to the work you were talking about, so that's why I asked. And I also, know that, like, I only have a small picture of Kehinde Wiley's Rumors of War, which we presented in 2019, which even though it was a Trump administration, right, it was a different one, and a different moment, and this work did not receive backlash. This is an equestrian monument of a black man atop a horse that was modeled after a Confederate monument Kehinde encountered in Richmond. But I think one of the reasons why this piece also didn't receive the backlash that Thomas J. Price's work did is because it used all the signifiers of power. So even though the rider was anonymous, it was still on a pedestal, on top of a pedestal, astride a horse with a pose that mirrored a war general, and also the rider was male. And then, you cut to a woman who was given no, major signifiers of power except for her scale, her height. She's 12 feet tall. But she's in a t-shirt and everyday clothes and, kind of has an unbothered look on her face and, is just existing, which I think in the absence of these historical narratives or formal signifiers of power do drive people a little crazy. And also it illuminated for me how emboldened we are as a society to speak to what we think a woman specifically and a woman of color should be wearing, or what her size should be, or what, her facial expression should be. That was like, why isn't she smiling? In a way that we just don't with male figures. And so for those layers, the fact that she was anonymous and that, you didn't have these grand signifiers around her, and she was a woman and a woman of color. So that was just one question I had around the piece you mentioned. And that's
Thank
why
you.
I asked.
Yeah, that was an interesting perspective. I think one would wonder what the reaction would have been if it was Beyonce,
Exactly.
right?
Yes. Except, have you seen the Tina Turner sculpture that everyone's so mad at?
I have.
Yeah. So I don't know, you kind of can't win. But yes, exactly. So I'm sure we got a comment somewhere where it's like, why not make this sculpture to Beyonce? I mean, it's a fair question.
What's the Tina Turner one like? I haven't heard of it.
There is a Tina Turner sculpture in Memphis that everyone's just saying is bad. They don't like it because it doesn't look like her and it wasn't done well, and I don't know. But anyway, but yes.
Oh, that's an
Other question. Hi.
Hi.
I came to this event for the food and I stayed because I'm in awe of your work.
Such a good compliment. Thank you. Wait,
but,
what now?
No, I mean, like, I love art. I came to Brown from New York City, and so I mean, like, this is what I love about the potentiality and the aliveness of being in New York, and living in Brooklyn specifically too, just like how art can engage or interrupt, and really force you to see the place you're living in, when for many in New York, it's a place to stay surface level or a place to extract and stay or leave. And so I'm wondering, like, as space becomes ever more contentious or limited, like particularly for, like, you've been exploring in your work, people who build the city and people who, like, without whom the city wouldn't be the same, how you play around with either, like, form or working within or disrupting a sense of space. And, like, there's a principle in communication that I really loved where it's like if a message isn't getting through, escalate the mode, not the tone, which, like, doesn't necessarily always apply here, but I'm wondering, like, maybe in that realm, like, how you escalate either mode, form to play around with space and play around with working within versus disrupting.
Yeah. Oh, good questions. Well, so one, I'll just say to space. So when we started working at Creative Time, it was, you said 2012, right, ish?
I was I was right during Occupy, and then you came January 2012.
Yeah. And
I know this because it got much better when she arrived. I'm just saying, I was very lonely without you, but yes.
Well, I was gonna say that during that time, there was just more spaces to discover in New York City, like, and since then, spaces have just become spoken for or privatized, even if they're vacant, someone owns it and kind of understands its value, and now they're gonna rent it out for corporate pop-ups, not public art. But, like, we got into all of these, and also there's, like, a little bit of problematics in there, because, public art is great for a gentrifying agent. Like, it's a great way to show people that this neighborhood's for you now, anyway. But there was, still crumbling factories on the waterfront that had not been developed yet, and the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the Brooklyn Army Terminal, and just like any vacant space, we needed to find a space in Red Hook to house 2,000 pigeons for Duke Riley's project, and, like, I don't know, it's just so space is increasingly difficult to access and to bring New Yorkers into a place that feels like, oh, this is for me, even for a little bit, is harder to do. And then in terms of Times Square, I have become a bit sizist. I don't even know if that's the right word, but, like, there is an argument that you can either, like, kind of play Times Square quiet or go big, and I really am leaning towards you have to go big to, like, get people to stop. And there's a way that you can play with things that are just not quite supposed to be there, because in Times Square in particular, you kind of, like, become conditioned to see anything. Like, when I was interviewing for the job, I think TWA was promoting their new wing in JFK, and they put in a life-size, an actual plane from the 60s in Times Square, and then there was an Italian yacht there, and then there was, like, a Hunger Games activation. You're just, like, you kind of make no assumptions about what you see, but if you can do something with material, like, Charles Gaines had these inverted sweet gum trees that almost looked like they were decaying, and it was like immediately because of the material, it's like, oh, that's not supposed to be here, is it? Or it could be there because we actually have other bronze sculptures in Times Square on this plaza. So placing a bronze sculpture in and of itself is not a disruption, but what the sculpture is of and about and who it's for is the disruption. Or it's kind of like, yeah, I guess a giant hot dog makes sense in Times Square, but then there's like surprises and twists. So yeah, play with it a little bit.
I think surprise is the big takeaway for me. I mean, one of the great pieces you did in the beginning was with Robin Frohart, the plastic bag store, which you could very quickly explain because we're running out of time, but like this idea of surprise, I think is what works best for the works that you put in the square.
I love that, and I'm sorry I don't have a bigger picture of it, but yeah, you know, Times Square is a space for kind of retail entertainment, retailtainment, I think it's like a word that's been coined, but you know, the M&M store and you know, the Hershey store and all the things that are basically selling you a product but entertaining you at the same time, that they become a destination. And so we had a vacant storefront where Robin Frohart turned it into something called the Plastic Bag Store, where you went in and it kind of looked like it would be a kind of campy midtown grocery store, but every single item was made of upcycled single-use plastics. So that produce section was
right there.
From years, from years of hunting down, you know, red plastic bags in Chinatown or orange bags at Home Depot to make the carrots, and she had over 10,000 products in there that she had made to kind of make a point, none for sale, just all for display, but kind of just letting you walk through the door thinking that you understand what's happening, and then giving you that surprise twist and kind of deeper level of engagement. And in this case, it was around our problematic relationship with plastics, kind of like put right in your face. And I could not walk into another grocery store after that project without only seeing the plastic, not the product. It was a nice kind of way to shift your eyes around reality.
One more question, yeah.
Yeah, I'm Roy, by the way. Nice to meet you. I'm a senior at RISD. I'm very curious about the midnight moments because of the fact that these are all commercial spaces owned by different corporations, as you said. And for corporations to kind of give up a few moments, this is pure charity work. It's not even tax deductible or anything. So, like, I'm curious, especially initially, how did you convince them? Like, what was your kind of word, what was kind of your copy to, like, say to them to kind of convince them and continuously kind of engage more of the different companies to get on board with this?
It's a good question. I know we're running out of time, so I'll try and keep it brief, but I love this topic because that's like the magic, is getting everyone to say yes to the same thing whose main purview is not the art. This started in 2012, so before my time. So it was the former director, Sherry Dobbin, and the president of the Alliance, Tim Tompkins, who got a couple of sign owners to say yes. Basically, it was around 8 or 10 displays, I think, at first, to say yes to showing art synchronized near midnight. There had been previous programs that had put art on screens only on one at a time, but through Creative Time and Public Art Fund. So there's a precedent for that. But I'll say, as it's grown, like when I got there in 2019, there were 63 screens playing the work. I'm gonna toot my own horn for a hot sec, but now there's 95, and that was individual conversation after individual conversation, and those sounded something like, you know, that's where I was thinking about, where are our shared interests? Like, where do we genuinely align? I mean, these screens are beautiful, and a lot of them are brand new and are high definition, and it's like a place for that out-of-home advertiser or building owner to show the world something spectacular that they could see nowhere else. And that is very much in line with Midnight Moment, is like using art to show off this display, but also show off Times Square and all that it can do. And Times Square, I think many advertisers are there because they know it's a space where people become seeking something spectacular, and they are looking at the billboards as a destination and as a visual spectacle. So why not really play into that and join your neighbors in showing someone something that they could find nowhere else, you know? So just really, and that's genuine. I mean, that wasn't lip service. So finding where our actual authentic commonalities lie was part of the pitch always. And then, some light shaming if that didn't work of, hey, all your neighbors are on board. And then I do offer the donated time as a tax deductible option, although no one's taken me up on that yet. But we also make it really easy for them. Sometimes it's just about the practicalities, explain how easy and turnkey it is and how it works and all that. But that's part of the pitch.
Thank you so much. Applause once again.
Thank you.